Welcome all, and thank you for joining today's Adabri webinar. My name is Matt Holdstock, and I'll be your webinar host today. In today's session, we'll take a look at rootstocks, in particular Australian-bred rootstocks, with a webinar titled New Rootstocks Released for Australian Conditions. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Adabri acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and the community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'd also like to acknowledge Wine Australia for providing funding and support for webinars via the Adabri's Extension and Communication Project. Before we jump into the webinar and make a start, just a couple of quick reminders to anyone who is new to the program. If you'd like to provide a comment or ask a question, please click on the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar, type in your question and click to send it through. We will hold a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but feel free to send in your questions at any stage throughout. A reminder also that this session is being recorded and the link will be sent through you later today via the Adabri's YouTube channel. For anyone who's just joined, welcome. Today's webinar topic is New Rootstocks Released for Australian Conditions, and it's with great pleasure to welcome Peter Klingleffer from the CSIRO. Peter has been involved in viticultural research for more than 50 years, since joining CSIRO in 1972 on completion of a Bachelor of Agricultural Science with honours from the University of Tasmania. A major focus of Peter's research has been the development of productive, low-input, mechanised management systems for quality wine and dried fruit production. Further research interests include the development of new wine, dried and table grape varieties, crop development and crop control to enhance wine quality, the impacts of irrigation practices on wine grape production and quality, the development of new rootstocks for quality wine and dried grape production, and the identification of wine grape varieties that can be adapted to climate change. Peter retired in June 2020 and is an honorary fellow with the CSIRO Agricultural and Food, and we're glad we've got Peter here today to talk. So Peter, I'll just get you to share your screen.
Okay, so my talk is on the development of new Australian rootstocks. I'd like to thank Wine Australia, Horticulture Innovation, and CSIRO for the support of this work, and my colleagues Rob Walker and Harley Smith. Now, rootstocks will play a major role, in our opinion, in the adaptation to future environments, such as issues around climate change, where we expect higher temperature and more transpiration or cooling, loss of water through the canopy, reduced rainfall, drought and limited water supply, increased climate variability, and at the soil level, we expect to see changes in the soil-borne pests, different biotypes, different biosecurity risks, and we already have information to suggest that some some rootstocks are breaking down at higher soil temperatures. There's issues around soil nutrient status and availability, particularly in some of our Australian environments with salt, and then water content and availability. And of course, someone has to make money, so we're looking at economic sustainability and market changes so that we efficiently use our resources, and rootstocks have a major role in all of those. This is a little old slide, but it shows the range of rootstocks that are currently grown in Australia. Very little has changed, except probably the proportions at this point in time. It should be noted that all of these rootstocks were bred more than 150 years ago, almost in some cases, and they've all been imported from overseas and not really been tested for all of the Australian environments. So all of these rootstocks have problems. For instance, 10114 has poor drought tolerance, and I'll show you something about that later. A lot of them are susceptible to root knot nematodes or high potassium in the fruit, and poor drought again. So there are issues with all of the stocks currently used. And if you want more information on the rootstocks, there's 22 rootstocks summarised in the Wine Australia rootstocks selector tool. So in the development of new rootstocks for Australian conditions, obviously we use breeding technologies, and some of the selection criteria we're after are rooting ability, graft compatibility, conferred vigour potential. Now, rootstocks generally are classified based on vigour or their conferred vigour, and this is an issue in some cases, but generally it's a good way to classify rootstocks. We're also after phylloxera tolerance or resistance, nematode resistance, particularly root knot nematodes. We want reasonable yields, preferably high yields, provided the product quality is okay. Water use efficiency, drought tolerance, salt exclusion, and we also have a look at fruit composition and wine quality. So before a new rootstock gets released, a lot of work has been done. Now, why is vigour important? Well, this just shows a relationship across 60 rootstock genotypes with pruning weight and pH. You can see that as pruning weight goes up, pH goes up. There are some even low vigour rootstocks which have high pH, so got to be careful when selecting even just on low vigour. But what we've been able to show across these 60 rootstock genotypes is a strong link between pruning weight and malic acid. Similarly, rootstocks have impacts on growth traits and fruit traits such as berry weight. And again, berry weight is highly linked to malate in the juice, and also yarn, use to assimilable nitrogen in the juice. Fruit composition, we look at a range of iron contents as well as other characteristics. And here's a good example between potassium being linked very strongly to pH and very strongly to malic acid. So the first part of the talk, I'm going to cover some of the issues and with the low to moderate vigour rootstocks. These were named and released for industry evaluation. We had a workshop with a lot of people from industry, and the recommendation was get them out there and they'll get tested. And that has worked to a degree. But we do have licensed propagators for these low to medium vigour rootstocks, Merbane 5489 and Merbane 5512, and KC Nurseries in Sunraysia, Glenavon Nurseries in South Australia, and ARM in Western Australia. And you can just see the range in vigour across some of those stocks. Merbane 6262 was released back in 2005. We don't recommend that stock at this point in time because it's been shown to have issues with high level, well, with salt uptake, is just not tolerant of salt and generally has low yields. So if we look at the original data that we had and why they were released for industry testing, it was largely around the vigour, or pruning weight is measurement of the conferred vigour, and and impacts on wine quality and wine composition. So if you look at pruning weights, Merbein 54, 55, 12, and at the time 62, 62, all had lower figure than 1103 Paulson or Ramsey standard rootstocks that these were compared with. They all struggle a touch to get high sugars compared to the standard rootstocks, and that's probably a benefit if we're looking to develop wines with lower alcohol content. They also had lower juice pH and in 2 cases lower yield. Merbein 5489 actually had better yield than 1103 Paulson. And a lot of people look at the yield to pruning weight ratio, which is the RAVAS index, and the numbers would suggest that 1103 Paulson and Ramsey are out of balance, and Merbein rootstocks are providing a good balance, and that's based on work that's been done overseas with using RAVAS index as a quality wine tool. Here's some of the data of wine made from these rootstocks. You can see they've all got better colour than 1103 Paulson or Ramsey, all brighter wines than 11 with lower colour hues, and also higher total phenolics. And we've been able to demonstrate improved quality attributes at lower alcohol levels and reduced variability from season to season. Now, there's been quite a bit of work done in more recent years with these stocks on various sites around the country. Merbein 5489 has turned out to be a very good rootstock in Penthaway when grafted with Shiraz, compared to a wide range of commercial rootstocks. And Merbein 5512 was also up there. And that's been based on a salt tolerance index, which incorporates production, vigour, salt exclusion, and wine quality. And that work's was undertaken by Dr. Rob Walker at CSIRO. Also, both 5489 and 5512 have given positive results with Cabernet Sauvignon in Coonawarra, and that's in a study conducted by Vine Health Australia. And that was based on both the production, fruit, and wine quality attributes of those stocks. In Adelaide Hills, there was a little trial with Barbera, and Merbein 5489 was by far the best rootstock when it came to fruit set, better than own roots, or 10114, which was the standard rootstock used in that site. There's been a lot of effort gone into rootstock trials. A couple of them have been established in Mornington in Victoria. And Chen here is the author of, I think, 7 papers involving those sites altogether, and done a lot of great work. But those trials have confirmed the Merbein rootstocks have low potassium status, one of the original selection criteria in Sunraysia, that had enhanced berry and wine colour and phenolics, and enhanced sensory attributes, colour with purple hues, fruity flavours associated with ethyl esters, and improved body of the wines. So that's quite a lot of work, activity has been taken with those rootstocks since they were released. And just to summarise that, they were named and released in 2005 based on results from one variety at one site. And the further evaluation is a long-term process. There has been significant difficulties with propagation by bench grafting. We don't know whether that's due to different rates of callus growth or callusing conditions, or we certainly know if they don't use as much water once they've established in pots, so it's very easy to overwater them. Field grafting appears to have been reasonably successful. One of the issues with low vigour is that they do take a little longer to establish in the field. Probably in some cases you might lose almost a year of production. Merbein 62, as I mentioned earlier, we don't recommend that because of the results with both yield and its salt sensitivity, and finally giving salty wine taste with Shiraz from Padthaway. But recent assessments across a diverse range of environments and scion varieties have been very positive for both Merbein 5489 and 5512. And if you want to further read information on the low vigour rootstocks, there is quite a lot available now from some of the earlier work, and then the more recent work by Chen with the Mornington trials. And that should be available to you, and I won't go into the slide in detail. Now I'm going to have a little break for a drink, and then while I'm away for a few seconds, if you've got any questions, you can think, and we'll talk about them later at the end of the talk. Okay. Now we'll talk about the more recent rootstocks, commonly referred to as the C series, and 3 of them, C114, C113, and C20, have been tested together in trials. C7 has been tested in a number of trials, but separate from the other 3. And R3331, which has been tested only for dried fruit. But the names that they now have PBR protection, and these names are protected as, so we have vibrant, resonant, elegant, resilient, and dominant are the names of those 5 rootstocks. Now, the first long-term trial, we've got data over 10 seasons from our Ripple site in Sunraysia. It started off with 26 rootstocks in the trial, but we've only collected data on 6 for this purpose. And there's 3 varieties: Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, and Shiraz. And data goes from 2013 to 2022. And the good thing about the rootstock work is, in this case, yield. There's no interaction with season, but that applies across just about everything we measure on growth traits and on fruit composition traits, which shows that rootstocks generally are stable over time. Now, this is just a quick summary of 10 years of data. From a yield perspective, Ramsay and Vibrant are the highest yielding rootstocks, and 1103 Paulson, 140 Ruggieri, and Elegant are the lowest yielding rootstocks, resonance in between. From a pruning weight perspective, 140 Ruggieri is quite low, as is Elegant, as we would expect, and Ramsay and Vibrant had the highest pruning weights. Associated with their very high yield, the Ramsay and Vibrant tend to have lower sugar, and Resonant tends to have the highest sugar. But associated with the high sugar is the high pH. One of the things we do look at is organic acid balance, the tartrate to malate ratio, and both Ramsay and Vibrant have the worst ratio, and Elegant, the new moderate vigour really rootstock, has the best organic acid balance. If we look at anthocyanins, they're down a little bit with vibrant, and that's across both Cabernet and Shiraz, and that's largely due to effect on Shiraz. And resident and elegant have the highest colour or highest anthocyanin levels. That's it. That's in the juice. One of the things we have found by having three varieties in one trial is that nothing's stable across varieties. So if we look at conferred vigour, even though it's used to classify rootstocks, in this case, elegant would be the lowest figure and followed by 140 Ruggieri, and Ramsay and Vibrant the highest figure, as I showed earlier. But you can see very big differences between varieties in the vigour, Chardonnay being low, Shiraz intermediate, and Cabernet having very high vigour when managed the same as the other varieties. So that suggests that different scions will require different rootstocks due to those significant interactions. We should look at Ramsay and Vibrant. They are stable across the three varieties from a vigour point of view, but the others are not. And elegant is stable but low. Or alternatively, maybe we have to do different management practices, such as deficit irrigation on the Cabernet to bring that vigour down, because they're completely out of balance, those vines. If you look at yield, that's again a slightly different story. There's actually isn't a rootstock where yield is stable across all three scion varieties. Again, Ramsay and Vibrant are the highest yielding, but with Cabernet Sauvignon, 1103 Paulson was low, and 140 Ruggieri was low. With Shiraz, 1103 Paulson was low, and with Chardonnay, Elegant was low. So there's nothing really consistent in yield across varieties, which is an interesting interaction. And just as one, there were fewer interactions with fruit composition traits, but for yeast assimilable nitrogen or yarn, there is some big differences. Ramsay had the lowest with Cabernet Sauvignon and the highest with Chardonnay. So very difficult to understand. Vibrant, again, was constant, being low in all of them across the rootstocks. And the level required of 150 metagrams per litre for adequate fermentation was basically met by all the rootstocks. 150 is about the cut-off for red wine grape varieties. Anything lower would have been a problem. Same sort of rootstock information out of pathway, except just with Shiraz. And again, the season by rootstock interactions were not significant. So their performance, the fruit composition, etc., is all stable over time. And the data for that trial, we see again Ramsay and Vibrant having the highest yield, 101.14, having by far the lowest yield, and yet that's the most widely adopted rootstock in that area. And 1103 Paulson and 140 Ruggieri were definitely less than Ramsay or Vibrant. Pruning mass, conferred vigour. You can see Vibrant has the highest vigour, and Ramsay in this case is not as high. It's actually less than 140 Ruggieri and 1103 Paulson. Oh, no, sorry, just 1103 Paulson. Sugar-wise, with the high yield, Ramsay struggling to get adequate sugar levels, whereas Vibrant is actually giving high sugar levels with the high crop. So that's it. a good aspect about vibrant is its ability to mature the fruit in pathway earlier. Resonant, again, is good for bricks, as is 10114. Colour-wise, the best colour was achieved with 10114 with that lower yield. And Resonant, Elegant, and 140 Ruggieri had intermediate levels of colour. And 1103 Paulson, Ramsey, and Vibrant low colour comparatively. That's in the berries. Now, we had an opportunity back in February 2017 during heatwave conditions when the irrigation had issues on that site, and I think it was 11 days without water, and there was considerable leaf loss, leaf burn, and even some horrible looking fruit. But we measured canopy loss and leaf burn after that event, and Ramsey, 140 Ruggieri, and Vibrant, particularly Vibrant, had no major issues with drought, so they would appear to be tolerant of short-term droughts, whereas at the opposite end of the spectrum, 10114 was a disaster, with loss of canopy and lots of leaf burn on the leaves that were left after loss of canopy. And that's the sort of fruit we would have been looking at from 10114. So we do know that Vibrant does have good drought tolerance, and Resonant and in particular Elegant were less drought tolerant. I've just thrown this slide in to show that all of those rootstocks in that trial compared to own roots had lower levels of chloride in wine that was made, and they're all very similar compared to own roots. So 1/3 or 1/4 of chloride levels that are in wine from own roots. Now, we also have these rootstocks, including Resonant, but we haven't put the data in, where they were managed with dry grape varieties, Carina, Sultana, and Sun Muscat. From 2014 to 23, we have data, and they were managed either with a full irrigation or a deficit irrigation, which was 45% of the controlled irrigation, so less than half the water. And you can see that here in this case, 1103 Paulson managed to maintain its yield with the deficit, just a minor impact. 140 Ruggieri had a 25% loss and Ramsey 13% loss. Vibrant had a little bit of a gain in yield with less water, which is quite interesting. I would like to have more study done on the physiology around that. And the main reason for the high yield with the deficit irrigation was higher bunch numbers. And that could well be due to reduced vigour and improved fruitfulness across those three varieties. And Dominant was able to maintain this production with 45% of the control. And again, higher bunch numbers. Now, just a little bit about salinity, and we'll come back to the Resilient, the rootstock, which has also been released. So we all know has major issues with grapevines, stunted growth, leaf burn, reduced yield. They accumulate in the juice and wine and end up with salty taste above certain levels. And wines may exceed permissible concentrations as well. And there can be diminished long-term capacity for chloride exclusion. And that's in the studies of Rob Walker et al. And that would be a picture from K5140, which the vines basically died. And in that work, you can see that K5140 had high uptake of salt in the leaves. 140 Ruggieri was a great excluder. Oops, sorry. And had major problems with salt burn, leaf burn, and in the long term, dead vines. So not the best from an economic perspective. Now, this slide again is from Rob Walker's work. And during the drought in 2008 and 2009, we had to reduce the water supply to those vines like everyone else in the district. And the salt level used for those 2 years is 1.3 decisiemens per metre. And just looking at the chloride and the sodium levels, own roots had very high uptake of both sodium and chloride. 1103 porcelain was not really any better much than own roots. Ramsay had quite high uptake, but less than own roots. And similarly, 10114, 140 Ruggieri and Schwartzman tended to have low levels of both chloride and sodium, but Resilient had very low levels of both, which is very interesting under low water and reasonably high salt stress, that it was able to keep both chloride and sodium at low levels in the juice. You also had a trial in Padthaway, data collected from 2015 to 2019 with Pinot Gris, and again, it's irrigated with saline irrigation water, and it shows basically the uptake by Pinot Gris of salt in the wine was still quite low, but all three rootstocks, Ramsay, 140 Ruggieri and Resilient, had lower levels of chloride in the wine. Also in the lemonade, also in the juice. So certainly Resilient has stood up there as a salt excluder. Then we actually have Resilient in a dried fruit trial, set up similar to the previous, where with sustained deficit irrigation, which is 45% of control. And it's important from a dried fruit perspective because sun muscat now is 50% of the dried grape industry in Australia. And in this case, 1103 porcelain, slightly different soil type to the earlier one, maybe a little bit heavier. 1103 porcelain had a major loss with the deficit irrigation. 140 Ruggieri, some loss. And Resilient actually had an increase in production with less water. So it has to be treated pretty hard, I think, to optimise its performance. And that, again, was in both bunch number and bunch weight. And that's an interesting observation for sun muscat when using Resilient as a rootstock. And this could well be around both effects on fruitfulness or just bunch retention at fruit set and berry retention at fruit set. And just to summarise, the near to release, well, they're not near to release anymore because they have been released. I should have changed that slide. But Resilient, I've got a star on here because it was excellent rootstock for sun muscat, particularly with deficit irrigation, as you saw. But it did have problems with Carina, and that was largely due to bunch necrosis. But Vibrant would look as a match for Ramsay, Resilient as a match for 1103P and 140 Ruggieri, Dominant as a match for Ramsay and possibly 1103P, Resonant as a match for 1103P and 140 Ruggieri, and Elegant as a match for 10114 and should be very useful in the cooler regions. There's plenty of information around on the new rootstocks as well. Quite a bit of reading in final reports and some papers that have been written. I'd like to thank all the people involved in this work, and it's a team effort developing new rootstocks, particularly when you're looking at the complete range of criteria that we try to assess. And thank you for listening and participating.
Thanks, Peter. That's very comprehensive. There's a lot of information there. There's been a few questions come through, so I'll just read them out for you. There's been a few. Do you know what it is about the scion crossed rootstock combinations with conferring vigor?
We don't know the underlying causes, no. But there certainly are, as I showed, big differences and interactions with both vigor and other aspects when we measure them. We did have a paper years ago, not with these rootstocks, but a range of rootstocks with sun muscat, where there was quite big differences in the diameter of the trunk below and above the graft union. So it does appear to be something happening at the graft union, which may attribute to that issue of scion interaction.
Just following on the grafting, there's another question related to grafting. Great to see the data. Do you have any comments on propagation success of each rootstock beyond the data you presented on rooting, i.e. what is grafting success?
We do have with our cooperating nurseries. I don't have the data in front of me, but propagation has been great for the 5 rootstocks that we currently releasing or have just been released. Yeah. With the Merbine series that was released for industry testing in 2005, those sorts of issues have cropped up post the release, I guess, because that was one of the tests upon release that was undertaken. And 140 reduce is also very hard to propagate.
There's another question. In terms of interactions of the rootstocks on yield, what is the mechanism for the differences? Do these new rootstocks convey differences through impacting fruitfulness, bunch number, or berries per bunch, fruit set, or berry size?
I'd say a combination of both. Well, we have all the data, so yeah, but I just don't have it all in front of me at the moment. But there would be differences in conferred vigor and in the number of buds retained for a start. Lower vigor, you might end up with more shoots retained. Then you would also have impacts on bud burst fruitfulness, as well as crop development involving fruit set, leading to differences in bunch weight, and as I showed in one slide there, quite big differences on berry weight.
There's another one here. Have any of these rootstocks been trialled on the European continent? Would be really interesting in the drought-prone areas of Spain, Portugal, southern Italy, southern France, Greece.
Not at this point in time, no.
Okay. Keep bringing the questions in. That's good. What does PBR protection mean? And does this add a cost when I purchase those C rootstocks as grafted vines, and how much more?
Of course, they are protected. That means they can only be provided through licensed nurseries. The same nurseries are able to supply these new rootstocks that I showed earlier. The extra cost associated with it is really around return on investment that both Wine Australia, Port Innovation and CSIRO, directly from the government, have to do. And I think the current cost is 60 cents per vine.
There's a couple more questions regarding grafting. The first one is, what symptoms might I see in the field if I have a graft incompatibility issue?
Yeah, well, we used to always say we had graft incompatibility if there was a sort of an overgrowth of the scion and a narrow trunk, but that's proven to be wrong, certainly with the variety Sun Muscat, where you can have large differences between the scion and the trunk. So I think the issues around compatibility are more likely to be seen with growth of the vine and its performance longer term.
And the other one is, do you see a general long-term issue for grafted stock with decreased vigor over time caused by initial graft wound being a site for dieback utuber potential?
No, we've never seen that sort of issue. In fact, the long-term graphs that I showed, which would be, well, we have 10 years of data, so the vines would be at least 14-year-old. There have been no issues at all, both in Padthaway or in Sunraysia. And I'm not aware of any problems in the Mornington studies with Pinot Noir. The only long-term impact, which has been published both by Rob Walker and the paper by Tim Pitt in South Australia, have been associated with long-term impacts of some rootstocks with their performance going down, where high levels of salt have been in the irrigation water.
Another question. Are you able to talk about potential benefits of Ramsay as a rootstock, especially in more confined soils?
It's interesting that in our studies in Padthaway, with limited water, and they're still fairly decent open soils, but Ramsay was actually had lower vigor than Vibrant, and less, I think, from memory, was it, than 1103 Paulson or 140 Dew, one of those. Yeah. But no, not really. We don't have the information on heavier soils.
Is resistant to nematodes?
Yes.
Yes. Another one's just come through. What work has been
Yeah,
done
that's
with...
all summarised in the last one of those last slides. Yeah.
Okay. What work has been done with rootstock tolerance and phylloxera genotype?
Yeah, well, both the low vigor rootstocks and the newly released rootstocks have been tested for the main biotypes in Australia. I think it's G1, G4, and sometimes G30, and I think in recent times the G38. It's a little bit hard to, I think there's 180 genotypes of phylloxera in Australia, but only 2 or 3 are really of major significance at this point in time.
There's another question that's come through about the availability of one of the rootstocks. Is Vibrant available in commercial quantities to purchase at present?
Yes. Yep. And certainly in South Australia, Glenavon would have quite a few significant quantities of propagation material.
There's a comment here, perhaps more so than a question.
C7 or resilient there's quite a lot of material of that available too from the licensed nurseries.
The positive absence of Utah is really interesting, as that is a serious problem in Europe. Love to see some trials here in Europe. We'll have to have a look. Elegant might have potential in Bordeaux, question mark. I'm not sure that's a question or a comment.
Yeah, that's those discussions between CSIRO and Wine Australia, I guess, need to be had about overseas use.
Yeah. Look, I think that's all the questions that have come through. Just like to again thank everyone for joining today, and thank Peter for providing a great overview of some new understanding of rootstocks for the changing climate here in Australia. Hope everyone got a lot out of today. As always, thanks for logging in, and you will also receive a recording of this presentation, which will be available on the Adbri YouTube channel. And we'll also put on some links to some of the information that Peter referred to late in the presentation today. The next Adbri webinar is next Thursday, the 29th of May, and it is titled Mathematical Modelling of the Analysis of Sustainability Data in Australia. So look out for the advertisement of this one coming soon. And if you'd like to register, please visit the Adbri website. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Adbri webinar. Have a good day.